gentlemen, Forrest will be here, and welcome back to another live stream. Today, I know what I said I was going to do earlier, but unfortunately, due to time constraints, I'm not able to do what I wanted to do tonight. So, I do have some days coming up that I have off. 4 back-to-back days in a row that I have off from my work. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what I said I was going to do today, as well as the Dead Space chapters 1 through 4 live stream. That is all going to be done on on 2 of those 4 days off. So that way, we can find some way to get those going. Because I just got back about 2 hours ago, and and just had supper about an hour ago, and I spent some time eating it. Like how it is with supper. Um, and so I realized I wasn't really feeling too awake, so I decided to wait until I was more awake to do this. So yeah, this is what we're doing for tonight. We'll see what tomorrow brings. I don't know what I'll be doing tomorrow after I get off work there. Then, because I work for I have another 4 hour shift tomorrow between 1 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But like I said, sometimes my ride likes to take me to other places, and sometimes we stay for a while. Other times, um, my ride may take me back home. But we'll see what tomorrow brings in regard to that. So maybe it might happen tomorrow, maybe not. Either way, we're gonna go ahead and get started with this book reading. This is not the official novel of the movie, based on the movie, Five Nights at Freddy's, for those wondering. And before we begin, I want to also let it be known, if I am in the middle of reading and I don't see your comment right away, please don't get upset. I'm in the middle of reading a book. I cannot always look up at the screen and respond right then and there. You know, so don't get upset about it. I'm just saying. Okay. With that being said, let's get started. Today I'll be reading chapters 11 through 13 because that's when the part that I was stopping at when I said the destruction of property begins between is takes place between 11 through 13. So yeah. So without further ado, let's begin. Chapter 11. Jeff watched the pathetic pile of rust lurch out of the lurch out of the parking lot. His heart rate, which had tripled when Mike had almost spotted him, settled back into its normal rhythm. As the junk heap on wheels chugged off down the road, Jeff pressed back against the pizzeria's warped siding. Immediately, he yelped and stepped away. He had forgotten the pain-peeling wood was so wet. Shaking himself off, Jeff dug into his pocket and pulled out his old flip phone. He punched in the number. One ring. Be like, wait, hold on, let me do this right. They'll be like, hold on. There you go. After the click, After the click, all Jeff heard was silence. No, not silence. His sister's breathing came through the line, faint and uneven. Max? Yeah. The word was soft but clipped off. Even with just the one word, Jeff knew Max was on edge. It's showtime, Jeff said. Soon as he's back, get the guys and meet me here. I think I found a way in. Max said nothing. Jeff pressed the phone closer to his ear. He couldn't even hear her breathing now. Max? Finally, Max repeated. Yeah. The tone was even edgier. The one word poked at Jeff's ear like a thorn. Time to get paid, Jeff said. Max sighed in his ear and then hung up. Maxine dropped her phone on the sofa and put her face in her hands. How had she gotten herself into this? I'm not a bad person, Maxine muttered, mumbled into her palms. Her conscience laughed at her and accused scathingly. Then why'd you agree to spy on Mike? Maxine shook her head. Then she felt the anger and hurt rise up, the feelings that had goaded her into betraying Mike. He deserved it, she'd told herself when she'd acquiesced to Jane's request to search Mike's house. Sure, Mike was never rude to her. He always said hello and goodbye and thank you. It wasn't like Mike ignored her. He did interact with her, but he never really saw her. If he did, he'd realize how she felt about him. Jane had caught Maxine on a bad day, the day Maxine had put on extra makeup and wore a new shirt in the hopes of catching Mike's eye, the day that Mike had looked right through her, as usual. That was why she'd agreed to do something that was so not who she was. Yeah, but you're the one who suggested messing up his job, her conscience prodded her. Not exactly, she argued back. All I said was... Maxine's conscience snorted at her, and Maxine dropped her hands. She looked around the shabby little house and shook her head. Life didn't deserve what she and her brother and the others were about to do. But how could she stop it now? I'm scum, Maxine told herself. Jeff grinned when his crowbar easily snapped the old padlock. The rusted hunk of metal dropped to the concrete with a thump, and Jeff reached out to grab the equally rusty vertical handle of the rolling steel door. The sun shone directly on the back of the pizzeria as its heat hit the still wet platform of the pizzeria's loading dock. Steam wafted upward. The slithery mist made Jeff think of graveyard scenes in horror movies. He shivered and immediately shook off the sensation, annoyed with himself. Putting on a swagger of confidence he was starting to lose. Jeff turned and faced the man leaning against his old green pickup truck. Hank, heavy set with long graying sandy brown hair and a scruffy goatee to match, was lounging against the truck's chrome grille, his thick forearms crossed over a large belly. Hank's downturned pale blue eyes studied Jeff like he couldn't decide whether to laugh at Jeff or kill him. Jeff had always been a little afraid of Hank, even more so today. Hank had an old wooden baseball bat resting on his beefy shoulder, and the way he twirled the bat was more than a little off-putting. Jeff shifted his gaze to Carl, Hank's son. Even though Jeff had known Carl for several years, they'd done time together, both as juvies and adults. Jeff had to admit Carl intimidated him, too. Dark-haired, Carl's eyes had the same downward tilt as his dad's, but Carl's eyes were spaced wider apart, and they were brown, like his mother's. Something about the way Carl's eyes squinted at the world, and the way his thin lips were usually pressed into a snarky smile, made Jeff perpetually nervous around Carl. Like Hank, Carl had a goatee, but his was much sparser than his dad's. That, Jeff thought, made Carl seem even more dangerous. Right now, for instance, Carl was toying with the 6-cell flashlight he had tucked into his belt as he threw menacing glances at Max's German shepherd, Bonesy. Jeff thought that if Carl had been carrying a gun, he'd probably have shot the dog. Jeff would never shoot a dog, especially Max's dog, but the dog was being a pain. He was barking his head off like he was announcing a coming apocalypse. Bonesy was in the pickup's cab, and Max was standing by the driver's side door. Her face was pale, and her lips were pressed tightly together. Hank saw the direction of his son's gaze and turned to look at the spun-up dog. Bonesy was really going for it. Froth was building up with it at his jowls as he barked and growled. Dog's gonna... Wait, hold on. I gotta do my gumshoe voice because of how they describe this. Dog's gonna be a problem, Hank said in his deep, scratchy voice. Carl kept eyeing Bonesy. Yep, Carl said. His voice was higher pitched than his dad's, but it had a coarse tone. Said right, yep. Hank spun the bat again and then lazily glanced around the nearby trees and the vacant expanse of asphalt behind the pizzeria. That's a whole lot of noise, he said. Sure is, Carl agreed. Hank pushed off the truck's grill and stepped to the open driver's side window. He looked at Max. Told you not to bring that dog, he said. His tone was more than a little threatening, but it didn't seem to faze Max. Max looked at her chin and glared at Hank. Jeff knew that Max wasn't afraid of Hank or Carl. She'd known them, and Hank's wife, Darlene, since Max was a little kid, because they were neighbors. She thought of Hank and Darlene as an aunt and uncle. She told Jeff. She tried not to think about Carl at all. She put up with him. She didn't like him. Hank shifted the bat. Carl stepped up next to his dad. He gave Max what Jeff thought was awfully close to a creepy leer. Jeff needed to get things under control. Stepping away from the now open loading dock door, Jeff took 3 long strides to reach the pickup. He pointed at Bonesy and shouted at Max, "Shut him up! Now!" He lifted his crowbar. "Or I will!" he said as severely as he could. Max lifted an eyebrow at her brother, but she reached into the pickup and put her hand on Bonesy's shoulder. She leaned through the window and began speaking soothingly to the dog. Jeff couldn't make out her words. Whatever Max said worked. Bonesy's bark subdued into a deep rumble at the back of his throat. Jeff quickly turned to Hank and Carl. Reaching under the bed of the truck, Jeff grabbed a large army green canvas duffel bag. "Come on," he said as if he was the boss. Jeff wasn't sure he was the boss of anything. Yeah, this had been his idea, and he'd been the one to ask Hank and Carl for help. But now that they were getting ready to head inside, Jeff was feeling like he wasn't as in charge as he wanted to be. Jeff motioned for the other men to follow him as he headed back to the open loading dock door. As he went, he saw Max getting into the pickup's cab. Hey, Easy, how you doing tonight? Also, thank you for the congratulations. I appreciate that. How you doing tonight? Maxine watched her brother lead Hank and his idiot son into the old pizzeria. "Or I will," she whispered, mimicking Jeff's voice. Maxine knew Jeff would never hurt Bonesy or any other animal. He was just posturing for Hank and Carl. Still, the words had stung. Maxine wrapped an arm around Bonesy's neck. She stroked his black and butterscotch fur in long, smooth motions. "There you go, boy," Maxine said. "It's all right." Shh. Bonesy's grumbling rumble subsided into a high-pitched whine. He began to pant heavily, and his whole body trembled. He turned and gave Maxine several agitated licks before looking back toward the pizzeria. When the dog's gaze settled on the old building, his trembling intensified, and his whines turned into whimpers. Picking up on her dog's obvious fear, Maxine's mouth went dry. Her stomach was as tight as a drum, and it felt like her intestines were clutching in rhythm to her heart's driving beat. She peered through the pickup's windshield and looked at the obscured area beyond the loading dock door. She pulled Bonesy closer. Rainforest always my time when you stream. I appreciate the kind words, Easy. I appreciate that. Jeff had thought that getting past the loading dock door was going to be the open sesame he needed to access the rest of the pizzeria. However, Dog in the background. Speaking of dogs, there's my dog in the background right there. However, the loading dock, he discovered, was separated from the rest of the restaurant by a locked metal door. Not wanting to fail at what had been his idea, Jeff ran at the door and gave it a strong kick. The kick came more from desperation than confidence, but, to Jeff's surprise, it worked. The lock cracked and the door snapped off its hinges. Flying backward, the door landed with a reverberating wham! Jeff exhaled in relief and looked at Hank and Carl nonchalantly, as if he'd totally known he had the strength to knock down the door. Moving forward with a "yeah, I'm the man" strut, Jeff stepped through the doorway and found himself in a shadowy kitchen lit by only a couple of dim fluorescent bulbs. The faint light only sort of revealed the kitchen's expanse, but it did a fine job of spotlighting the hundreds of cobwebs networked through the dusty space. Hank and Carl looked around, both starting to have their weapons of choice. Jeff spoke up. "Let's go check out what we have to work with before we start," he suggested. Neither Hank nor Carl argued with Jeff, so he led them out of the kitchen. Stepping into a long, dark hallway, Jeff shook off the heebie-jeebies that had started on the loading dock. For the next 10 minutes, Jeff and his henchmen rendezvoused. Jeff and his henchmen meandered through the empty restaurant. "This is gonna be a gas," Carl. Wait. "This is gonna be a gas," Carl said, as they did a quick, eager tour of the place. After one circuit through the pizzeria, they returned to the huge wreck of a dining room. Standing just inside the archway that separated the dining room from the deserted lobby, the men exchanged grins. "Okay," Jeff said. "Let's be quick, but thorough. Maximum damage. Minimum time." Hank and Carl exchanged a glance. Then they nodded. "Anything that looks valuable," Jeff said, "grab it. We'll settle up when we're done. Good?" Hank and Carl nodded again in unison. One lift and one drop of their bloated chins. Jeff, suddenly feeling more excitement than fear, let out a whoop. He brandished his crowbar like a berserker about to head into battle. This might have been inspired by the Vikings movie he'd seen the night before, but whatever. He was fired up and ready to go. "Let's get to it!" Jeff shouted. The three men exchanged fist bumps, then charged into action. Jeff and Carl ran into the dining room. Hank turned and strode into the lobby. After a couple steps, Jeff's and Carl's paths diverged. Carl marched straight across the dining room, aiming at the curtain-covered stage. Jeff veered left, heading to the arcade. Angling toward the games area at a full run, Jeff was raising and getting ready to swing his crowbar as he got to the glass cabinetry of the prize counter. Jeff yelled, "Yee-haw!" His berserker energy. No, he'd be more like, "Yee-haw!" His berserker energy exploded into a frenzy as he brought down the crowbar on the dimly expanse of glass. A satisfying crackling crash preceded a raining like tinkling of glass that showered down onto the black and white floor. Jeff grinned and raised his crowbar again. Striking the glass over and over, Jeff quickly obliterated the prize cabinet. He pulverized the glass into sparkling fragments that twinkled in the rays of sparse light that illuminated the arcade. Trumping over the nearly vaporized glass, grinding his head against any large shards he saw, Jeff tore into the arcade and began thrashing every game console he encountered. Pinball machine, glass disintegrated the same way the prize counter did. Plastic bumpers and flippers cracked. Wood cabinets splintered. The other arcade games succumbed in similar ways as Jeff's crowbar chewed through them. Jeff's brain had gone into hibernation as he gave in to the fury of striking and pounding on the machines. Exhilarating beyond belief, the demolition charged Jeff up and gave him the strength to swing the crowbar over and over and over. Sweat poured off his face and his breath came in jerky heaves, but he didn't care. He was having the time of his life. Hank was boogieing to the music only he could hear. The, the drum beat of a jazz rock song was thumping in his head, and he was marching his moves to its rhythm. Plunging left and right, cross-stepping, spinning and hip-wiggling, Hank was dancing his way past all the glass-framed posters in the front hallway. As he went, Hank was shattering the fragile expanses, hopping fluidly out of the way as jagged fragments flew toward him. In spite of his size, Hank thought he was pretty darn graceful in his ability to avoid the flying shards. Hank danced his way down the hall and back, crushing glass and spattering frames. He was having a blast. Back in the lobby, Hank took care of the posters there too. Then, full on in his groove, and not wanting to stop the boogie mode that had overtaken him, Hank started on the walls, welding his bat as nimbly as one of those baton twirlers who pranced around in front of the marching bands. His trusty bat punched the gaping holes at the lobby's drywall. Clouds of dust exploded from the walls. Hank figured he was probably turning white, but he didn't care. He was having too much fun. Carl hopped onto the stage and grinned at the closed curtains. He having been told about Freddy's pizzeria, Carl knew what was probably behind the curtains. He couldn't wait to start his annihilation. Twirling his flashlight like he was spinning a parade rifle in a drill line, Carl affected a cocky saunter as he stepped toward the gap in the curtains. Lifting the large flashlight with his left hand, poised to strike, Carl stuck his head between the curtains. Smirking, he called out, "Honey, I'm home!" Carl gazed into the darkened expanse. His brash grin faded. Frowning, his flashlight wavered. He used his right hand to pull back the curtains so more of the dining room's weak light could brighten the backstage area. He looked left and right. "Huh," Carl said. The old crusty Freddy's characters he had expected to find waiting to be beaten into smithereens weren't there. The backstage was empty. Carl stepped forward and let the curtains close behind him. He felt like he was walking into the choking smoke of a dense fire. He could see the little more than the faintest shapes around him, and then the air felt thick and weird. It kind of smelled like, well, kind of like the smell that had come from under his family's house when the rats he'd poisoned had died and started decomposing. Carl looked around, half-heartedly, seeking something to destroy. He thought there might be costumes he could shred or props he could wreck. But Carl didn't try very hard to find something to bash with his flashlight. He was losing interest in the backstage area. Yeah, sure, that was it. The problem wasn't that Carl was starting to feel spooked. Carl was feeling very strange. Even though his life as an uninterested underling to his mechanic dad during the day and a rabid sports fan after hours left little room for intuition, his gut was telling him that something was wrong here. Something felt off. Carl quickly scurried back through the curtains. He jumped off the stage. Surveying the empty dining room, Carl listened to the sounds of crackling and crashing and clattering coming from the arcade in the front hallway. The sounds settled him. Even better, they gave him back his pluck. His smirk returned, and he turned to face the stage. Laughing at himself for letting the backstage get to him, Carl was tempted to thumb his nose at the stage curtains, which were still swaying slightly from his movement through them. Then he got a better idea. Carl's parents had never installed in him the idea that he was anything other than a disappointment who wouldn't amount to much. As a result, Carl had been walking around for years with a frustrated ball of "I hate you" in his stomach. It wasn't like he hid his disdain for the world. He flung around of browsing and sarcasm, but Carl had never felt fully expressed had never fully expressed the depths of his scorn. Now he was going to. Tucking his flashlight in his belt, Carl started whistling as he unzipped his fly. Please smell like a sewer, Carl muttered. So, Carl planted his feet at the base of the stage. Fire in the hole, he said. Hello, Izumi. How you doing tonight? And welcome back. Jeff cackled in giddy elation as he looked down at the front of quarters, erupting into the air. Tingling and trilling and churring, the coins glided over the black and white squares on the floor. When they hit the dirty checkerboard, the coins spun and rolled and hopped. That's what I'm talking about, Jeff said. He looked down at the coins and started to bend over to gather them, but then his gaze landed on the next machine's locked coin box. One more, he thought. He stepped to the next machine and used his crowbar to pry open the vault. It gave way as easily as the last one had, and another waterfall of change gushed out over the floor. This time Jeff couldn't help himself. He dropped to his knees and he grabbed a handful of glittering bounty. Yes! He shouted as he raised his fist and savored the feel of the coin's rough round edges. Yeah, they were just quarters, not gold doubloons, but Jeff still felt like an adventurer unearthing treasure. The last time he'd been this jubilant was when he'd hit a modest jackpot with the quarter slots at a casino in Vegas. Then his haul hadn't been all that great, but the sound of the dings and hoots and cascading coins had given him a rush. He felt that same rush now. Jumping to his feet, Jeff shot toward the next machine in line. He raised his crowbar. After expressing his opinion of Freddy's, and the world in general, Carl had moved on to the kitchen. There he found plenty of things to beat up on. Carl hooted as mountains of red plates and saucers shot forward out of the stainless steel shelving until he'd just knocked over. The dinnerware exploded out over the floor, and Carl hopped up and down on the broken pieces, his heavy boots grinding into the crockery's sand-like bits. Gah! Carl shouted. He turned toward the expanse of stainless steel cabinets on the opposite wall. Anticipating more ruinous fun, Carl threw open one of the cabinet doors. The shelves behind the door were empty. Carl let out an involuntary sigh, but his bubble burst. Shrugging, Carl slammed the cabinet door. Whatever, Carl muttered. He moved on to the next cabinet. Flipping its doors open, fully prepared and to dump more fragile porcelain, or whatever it was, Carl's shoulders slumped when he once again found empty shelves. Again, Carl tried the next door and the next. Empty, empty. Carl tried one more. The last cabinet was an empty. A small painted plastic and metal cupcake sat on the cabinet's bottom shelf. Bright pink with googly eyes and two big white teeth, the cupcake spotted one upright candle that was centered on the small white plate. Carl frowned. What the... Hank ambled into the dining room, whistled along with the music in his head. Ever since he'd started pounding on the drywall, Hank had been hearing the forensic notes of the Toreador song from Carmen. Hank loved that music. It always made him feel like a winner when he heard it, and it has become part of his personal theme song. Hank twirled his bat as he rambled past a collapsed stack of bent and dirty clothes. His whistling got louder, and he directed the music with his free hand. The surge to damage returned as Hank looked forward to something else to destroy. A a clatter cameo. A clatter came from the arcade, and he looked that way. Tragically to myself, yeah. Uh, Hank, however, didn't want to step on this kid's toes. Jeff tried to act tough, but Hank knew the guy was a closet pussycat. Hank also should know Jeff was not afraid of him. Hank thought that the height that was thought that was a hoot, and he played into it as much as possible. But today decided to let Jeff feel like his emperor parents. Uh, yeah. The surge to dance returned as Hank looked for something else to destroy. A charter came from the arcade, and he looked that way, maybe attempted to hold Jeff. Hank, however, I don't want to see on the little kid's toes Jeff trying to act tough. But Hank knew where the guy was from. Hank also knows that you're Jeff and I'm afraid of him. Hank thought that was a boost, and he should play into it as much as, you know. Uh, Boo today, he decided to Jeff play feel like he was a he was the lady's name submarine. Hmm, that's fun. Alright, let's see here. I'll go ahead and just read the paragraph I was just on. The urge to dance returned as Hayden looked for something else to destroy. A clatter came from the arcade and he looked that way, tempted to join Jeff. Hank, however, didn't want to step on the kid's toes. Jeff tried to act tough, but Hank knew the guy was a closet pussycat. Hank also knew Jeff was afraid of him. Hank thought that it was a hoot, and he played in as much as possible. But today he decided to let Jeff feel like he was the leader. Nah, Hank could find something else to play with. Maybe the kitchen, Hank thought. He started meandering the discussion, asking her to bail. What is that? Yeah. Alright. Yeah, just making sure I know where I'm at. Maybe the kitchen, Hank thought. He started meandering the the destruction using his thing here. Uh, yeah, I got something here. He started me- meandering in the direction Rom his bad to destroy as much furniture as he could along the way. There we go. I'm just gonna go ahead and get me something to drink real quick. I'll be right back. Alright, I'm back now. Also, hello Lion Blade and Dirk's Greasy Reviews. How are you two doing today? And also, Dirks, thank you for the congratulations. I appreciate that. Thank you. I decided to get me some tea. So that way, because I think I was dozing off a little bit there, so I decided to get me some tea to drink. Alright. Let's get back into the story. The kitchen, although not by any means bright, was lit up enough that Carl hadn't needed his flashlight to see. The cupcake nestled in a misshapen patch of darkness under the shelf above it. However, required more illumination. What was that thing? Carl lifted his flashlight and good smile. Carl lifted his flashlight and aimed its beam at the bulging white eyes nestled in hot pink. The ants crawling on the skin feeling he'd gotten backstage returned. The cupcake was just plain wrong. The way its gaze appeared to be locked on Carl made him want to. The cupcake blinked. Carl yelped. Before he could decide what to do about the animated mini cake, a resounding clang came from behind him. Carl spun around. Not sure what to expect when he turned, but totally pent up and ready for, well, anything. Carl was relieved when he saw no movement except the back and forth motion of two large copper pots hanging from a stainless steel rack above the heavy-duty restaurant range. Carl rolled his eyes at his overreaction and reversed direction to return his attention to the weird little cupcake. He once again aimed his flashlight at the cupcake was gone. Carl sucked in his breath as he stared at the uneven lights jittering out in front of his flashlight. His gaze backed up to his hand. It was shaking. Well, hell yeah, it was shaking. Where did the cupcake go? His eyes was wide open as he could get them. Carl slowly rotated, clutching his flashlight as he swept the area around him with its beam. I did see you posted something Lion Way, but I'll read it after I'm done reading the page because it's at the very end of the current chapter. The wobbly ray of light cut through the kitchen's splotchy grayness and landed on. Carl's eyes nearly popped out of his head. He'd found the cupcake. And that wasn't all. The pink cupcake and its plate were now being held in a massive, yellow-furred hand. Carl's flashlight beam waggled as it rose upward from the cupcake. When the light encountered the moth-holed, thinly yellow face of a massive chick with a large mouth full of barred teeth, Carl only had a second to feel a surge of shock before the psychotic-looking bird lunged at him. Well, he's dead. Let's see. I'm good, just getting some stuff. Oh, okay. Alright. Alright, Lion Blade. I'm gonna be curious to see how that goes for you. Alright. Very curious indeed. Chapter 12. Just a couple steps from the service door that separated the kitchen from the back hallway, Hank was readying his bat when he heard a shriek that stopped him in his tracks. The shriek was so loud it felt like it radiated right through Hank's skin and it drilled into his veins, congealing the blood that was trying to flow through them. You know what? Just for added effect, we gotta do this. Alright, so I'm about to play a scream sound effect. So that way we can do this. Alright? I'm gonna read it again with that scream added in, alright? Just so we all know what's about to happen. Just a couple steps from the service door that separated the kitchen from the back hallway, Hank was ready in his bat when he heard a shriek. That sounded. Did that scream sound awfully familiar to anybody? That scream sounded like the scream that the one Sonic.exe. Yeah, that's not right. The shriek was so loud that it felt like it radiated right through Hank's skin and drilled into his veins, congealing the blood that was trying to flow through them. The sound very clearly came from the other side of the door. Hank was approaching. His whole body was quivering in response to the chilling sound. The shriek had been so piercing that it hadn't sounded human. But if the shriek was human, it had to have come from his son. Hank stepped forward and cautiously peered through the round window set in the service door. Tense, ready to react, and hanging back a couple feet from the door, Hank looked through the dirty glass. Because the kitchen's lights were so lame, Hank couldn't see much of anything through the glass. He had to get closer. The Toreador's song having come to a screeching stop, and the tinkling sounds of the arcade having ended a few minutes before, Hank shook off the sudden grim silence that pressed in around him. He put his face up to the door's glass. The silence gave way to another crescendo of noise. This time, screams intertwined with heavy gasps and a clamorous chaos of taps and clangs and thunks. Hank's gaze looked toward the sounds and he saw. Hank let out a mew of surprise and horror. His breath, caught half in and half out, threatened to choke him. Hank gawked at the prone body of his son. Staring at Carl's flopping feet and moving up to his writhing body, Hank's gaze landed on something that just couldn't be possible, but it was. A small, bright pink cupcake with a toothy mouth was chewing its way through Carl's face, or what was left of it. Carl, Hank breathed. The truth was, Carl no longer had a face. The cupcake was burrowed halfway into Carl's head. The bone structure of Carl's face was obliterated, and the cupcake was still going. Too stunned to even begin to process what he was seeing, Hank yelled. Hank yanked his gaze upward. It tracked along strips of fuzzy yellow and orange material clinging to exposed metal. It ran over the bulge of more fuzzy yellow past a dirty bib with the words, "Let's eat." Getting ready for this next bit. And it landed on an open orange beak, revealing two rows of vicious-looking teeth. Above the teeth and the beak, irradiant white eyes were staring directly back at Hank. Hank screamed. You know that sound effect? I actually know that sound effect. Um, Mr. Nightmare, if you don't know who he is, and you know, for those that don't know who he is, he is a he is a storyteller that talks about events that may or may not have happened. He always puts it allegedly true because, you never know what's true and what's fake in the online world of the world of the internet. That sound effect was from this one video. I think it was like 3 true crawl space horror stories. That sound effect will be there. I remember and he used that sound effect to such a great effect because when I first heard the story that it was involved in, that fucking scream made me jump. And I was like, I jumped I probably jumped worse than what I did the other day. You know, sounds like shush. Once he'd emptied all the coin vaults of their booty, coins, Jeff had filled his duffel bag with his loot and slung it over his shoulder. Straight and happily, Jeff had headed toward the front of the restaurant. Jeff had seen Hank heading toward the back hallway. He didn't know where Carl was, and at that moment he hadn't cared. He was in search of more spoils. Doing a quick exploration of the front hallway, poking his head briefly behind each of the closed doors, Jeff had found the security office at the end of the hall. When he'd spotted the old security camera equipment, he knew he could do some real damage in that room. Jeff had smiled wildly as he stepped into the unlit room. Its only light came from the security monitors. Eager to lay waste to the equipment, Jeff hadn't bothered swiping at the light switch. He dropped his duffel bag on the floor. It had landed with a satisfying rush of clinks and a few tinkles as a handful of coins escaped from the canvas carrier. Jeff had started toward the desk that held the monitors. He'd raised his crowbar in preparation for some more body-buzzing vandalism. Stepping behind the desk, Jeff had taken aim at the monitors. And that was when he heard the scream. And that was when he heard the screams. Yeah, some of those are cheesy. It started with a screech that didn't even sound like it had come from a person's mouth. A stretch of silence, and then another set of screams. More silence. Then one long, drawn-out scream. Instead of laying waste to them with his crowbar, Jeff looked at the monitors. His gaze whipped from one to the next. Should be almost there to the end. Oh, a bit further than not as far as I thought he would be, but whatever. The last long scream had been deep and uneven. Jeff was sure it had come from Hank. Hank? Jeff leaned forward and looked at the monitors. He scanned all the interior views. There! On the dining room camera feed, Hank could be seen sprinting through the wide open space. He was running flat out as if being chased by a whole horde of ghouls. Rapt, Jeff watched until Hank disappeared from the dining room feed. Jeff's gaze shifted to the adjoining monitor, and sure enough, there was Hank pounding down the main hallway. He was coming toward the office. But wait. On the monitor, Hank stopped and looked back over his shoulder. His movements were spasmodic. He was clearly scared out of his mind. As Jeff continued watching the monitor, Hank flung open one of the doors that lined the hall, one about midway down. Hank dashed through the door and disappeared from view. Jeff frowned and looked at the other monitors. None of them provided a view of what was behind the door Hank had gone through. It was a supply closet. Jeff knew this from his cursory check of the area. "What the hell are you doing?" Jeff asked of Hank, who couldn't see or hear him. When he'd broken out all the poster frame glass, Hank hadn't thought to destroy the frosted glass set into all the doors. He wasn't sure why he hadn't, but now he was glad he had left the doors alone. Hank was hoping this one was going to prevent him from having his face eaten, or something worse. Hank wasn't sure what kind of enclosure he was in. A closet? A room? The most weensy bit of light from the hallway seeped, seeped through the frosted glass on the door, and that light revealed little more than the door frame and the doorknob. Everything else around Hank was so black that it was like the void of lights had mass and substance. It felt like that the mass was crowding in around Hank, attempting to wrap him in a less than friendly hug. The sounds of Hank's wheezing breaths filled the darkness. You could smell the reek of his own sweat and the stink of his breath. It smelled like the stale coffee he'd swilled before coming to the pizzeria. Outside the door, a shout reached down the hall. "Hank!" It was Jeff's voice, and the guy didn't sound particularly scared. His voice was laced with more curiosity than fear. Hank exhaled in relief. If Jeff was coming down the hall calling Hank's name, the big yellow bird thing couldn't have been nearby. Jeff wasn't the sharpest tool in the toolbox, but he wasn't stupid enough to be calling out like that if he was facing a threat. "Jeff?" Hank shouted. "Hank!" Jeff responded. "What are you doing?" His voice was a little faint. He was still a ways down the hall. A force of two was better than a force of one. Together they could get out of the building. Hank grabbed the doorknob. He tried to turn it. It wouldn't budge. Hank jiggled the knob. Forcefully. It held fast. He threw his considerable bulk against the door. It held up to his weight. No longer thinking about Jeff, or anything else, Hank was now single-mindedly intent on getting out of the room he was stuck in. He tried battering the door with his body again, but that got him nothing but a sore shoulder. Hank turned and looked into the outer space-like vacuum behind him. He quailed and turned back to the door. He began swiping at the wall with the flat of his hand. "Come on," Hank muttered. There had to be a light switch. But there wasn't. Hank's groping hands found nothing but rough wall, even when he stepped to the right and the left. A telltale jingling came from above Hank's head. Not a switch, he thought. A pull cord. Hank reached up and felt around. I did see the comment, but I'll read it after I'm done reading this section that I'm on, because I see where the stars are at, and that's where I usually stop to read chat, unless I'm as well as on the end of the chapter. Hank reached up and felt around. His hand encountered the end of a heavy string. He grasped it and pulled. Nothing. "Come on, you stupid," Hank began as he yanked again. This time the cord did its job. A single bare light bulb came on. Hank blew out a pent-up breath. "Yeah," he said. Now all we had to do was find something in the room that could break the door's knob or its glass. Hank turned and looked right into the pair of glowing eyes. These eyes didn't belong to the other lethal-looking chick, but they didn't belong to anything cuddly either. Hank was looking up into another tooth-filled face. This face, topped by two bent rabbit ears, was missing most of its fur. Its bright white eyes were surrounded by a mass of metal and exposed wires. Hank screamed, yet again. Yes. See, I just found this. Who's this? ZX Ghostly, first off, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. And if you are still here, how are you doing tonight? Just a few feet from the closet Hank's calls had come from, Jeff, who was walking slowly, lugging the heavy duffel bag, froze. Good night, man. Alright, Lamblade. Thank you for stopping by. Hope you have a good rest of your night. Hopefully I don't give you any nightmares from reading this book. Just a few feet from the closet Hank's calls had come from, Jeff, who was walking slowly, lugging the heavy duffel bag, froze when he heard Hank scream. Jeff looked toward the door. The first scream was followed by a second one, then a third. The sounds of whipping and crunching which wrapped around the screams like devouring serpents reached out from behind the door. The door rattled. Then, smack! The silhouetted hand hit the door's frosted glass. Jeff's breathing caught in his throat when he watched the hand leave an oak-pocked smear across the glass. The smear streaked downward above the hand, and the hand dropped from view. Hank wasn't screaming anymore, Jeff realized. When the hand disappeared from the glass, all Jeff could hear was a faint gurgle. Then silence. Jeff's crowbar slipped from his hand. It hit the linoleum with a clang that rebounded down the hall and then seemed to boomerang back to Jeff. His gaze still riveted on the door, Jeff adjusted the duffel bag strap that cut into his shoulder. It felt like the bag was getting heavier by the minute. Jeff took a tentative step toward the closet door. Hank? He whispered. Jeff wasn't sure why he said Hank's name. He didn't know what had happened to Hank, but he knew it wasn't good. Still, maybe Hank was injured and needed help. Jeff shuffled forward another half step, but he stopped when the door shimmied ever so slightly. Jeff locked his gaze on the door. He looked back down the hallway toward the office. Should he retreat and lock himself in that room? He looked on down the hall. Should he make a run for it? Head for the main doors? Jeff's brain was chained by the blood engorged veins that pulsed madly in tune with his heart's clanking pace. He couldn't think. The door began to open. Inch by excruciating inch, more and more mysterious murk was revealed. Hank? Jeff asked. Hank did not appear, but something else did. Jeff felt like the floor beneath him turned into the yawning deck of a boat caught in a hurricane when he saw what was stepping out into the hallway. Reality folded in on itself. Jeff was looking at the oversized, dilapidated mass of a robotic bunny? Jeff tried to process the torn and dirty fur, the exposed metal beneath it, and the blue bent ears. And as Jeff looked at the bunny, it turned toward him. The bunny had blazing white eyes set in the exposed metal of a ravaged face dominated by an impossibly wide mass of horrible teeth. Those eyes were looking right at Jeff. Jeff's brain, overcome as it was, managed to get a message to Jeff's feet. Run, his brain commanded. Jeff spun around and shot like a rocket down the hall, back toward the office. The heavy duffel bag slammed against Jeff's hip over and over as he ran. The pounding hurt, and yet Jeff couldn't bring himself to drop the bag. He kept lugging it with him as he galloped down the hall. He could hear the tinkling clink of coins hitting the floor behind him, but even that didn't discourage him from hanging on to the bag. He clutched it even as he rushed into the office and slammed the door behind him. Jeff fumbled with the door lock, eventually clicking it into place. He stared at the door as he finally dropped the duffel bag. More coins spilled over the floor with a clatter. Jeff didn't care. Looking wildly around him, Jeff spotted the landline phone on the shelf behind the desk. He dashed over to it and snatched up the receiver. He immediately started punching in 911 as he put the phone to his. Jeff pulled the phone from his ear. He winced and stared at the receiver. A nightmarish clamor of children's laughter was blanting from the phone. The laughter was high-pitched and frenzied. Jeff dropped the receiver back into its cradle. He looked over at the door. It was still closed, and Jeff couldn't see anything through the glass. He turned his attention to the CCTV monitors. His gaze immediately landed on the exterior feed that was focused on the back of the building. Jeff saw his truck still sitting next to the loading dock. Max remained in the cab with Bonesy. For an instant, Jeff's heart rate slowed. That truck was safety. All he had to do was get to. Movement on another monitor caught Jeff's attention. He looked at it. Glaring directly back at Jeff, or rather at the camera that fed this monitor, were the blue bunny and a yellow chick with a sharp yellow beak. Although the chick's face was in better shape than the rabbit's, it didn't look any less threatening. Both the chick and the bunny continued to study the camera. Jeff could feel them looking past the lens, down the wires, directly at him. He took a step back from the monitors. At the same time, the chick on the monitor moved. Jeff stepped forward again, leaning in to see the monitor more clearly. Jeff watched the chick bend over and crouch down. It was right in front of a vent cover low down on the wall. Jeff felt his brows bunch as he tried to figure out what the chick was. The chick wrenched the vent cover off the wall. Then she held a plate out in front of her. Jeff blinked. He hadn't even noticed the plate, until a bright pink cupcake with buck teeth hopped off the plate and disappeared into the now open vent. What in the... Jeff began. Metallic banging and clanging resounded through the building. It was muffled and distant, but it stretched out and reached like fingers into the office. Jeff looked at the walls around him. The sound was coming from within them. He returned his attention to the monitors, urging his brain to help him out. What was going... Jeff looked at the walls again as the banging continued, and then he got it. No, Jeff said. The banging again began getting louder. The cupcake was moving fast. Jeff stepped away from the desk and quickly scanned the room, his gaze going left and right, up and down. Was there a... His gaze landed on a vent... Hold on a second. Alright. His gaze landed on a vent cover on the wall. Jeff stared at it as the banging's volume went up another couple notches. Getting closer, Jeff thought. He immediately dropped to his knees. He ducked under the credenza and looked at the vent cover. He had to find a way to block. A noisy clinking bang. Jeff spotted bright pink on the other side of the vent cover. Instantaneously, Jeff braced himself against the slatted metal. It thrashed against his shoulder. Jeff yelped and looked down between the slats. He could see a fury of bright pink through the dark gray openings. The office's fluorescent bulbs caught the white of gnashing, razor-sharp teeth snapping viciously at the slatted metal. Jeff hiccuped several panicked breaths, trying to brace his rubber-soled hiking boots against the dusty linoleum. Jeff attempted to press harder against the vent cover. The dust, however, created a surface as slick as ice, and Jeff's feet slipped away from him. The teeth against the metal slats sounded like metal meeting a power saw. The high tinny sound was drilling into Jeff's eardrums. Whimpering, he tried to replant his feet, but they once again slid across the floor. The vent cover shuddered, and a corner of it popped loose from the wall. Jeff wailed. He squeezed his eyes shut and shifted his shoulder to press against the loose edge. Another clamorous slam and silence. His breathing still ragged, his pulse pounding. Jeff opened one eye and looked through the slats. He saw nothing. Jeff tilted his head and looked hard into the air shaft's gloom. The chute behind the vent cover was empty. Jeff exhaled loudly. He pulled his shoulder from the vent cover and brought his shaky hand to his face, wiping away the sweat that matted his hair to his skin and ran down his neck. Weakly, Jeff levered himself to his feet. He took another deep breath. As he started to exhale, he turned back toward the desk. Jeff froze. His breathing stopped mid-exhale. The office door was open. Feeling like his eyeballs were vibrating in his head, Jeff strained to look through the open doorway. At the same time, he tried to reason out why the door was open. He had locked it, hadn't he? And even if he hadn't, who had opened it? Jeff's gaze whipped around the office. He was the only one in it, but his attention snapped to the filing cabinets on the opposite wall into the single upright locker next to a breaker box on the wall opposite the door. Could something small have gotten into? That disturbing thought lit a fire under Jeff's feet. Hesitating next to the door jamb, equally afraid of what might be hiding in the office and what might be lurking outside of it, Jeff inched his head through the door opening. Once he had his head far enough out in the hall to see, he looked along the length of the hall in both directions. He saw nothing. Jeff couldn't believe his luck, and he wasn't going to waste it. He immediately dashed out into the hallway and started toward the Jeff turned into a statue. What was that? The voice, which seemed to be bouncing every which way at once, was a cross between a chant and a monotonous song. It was a teasing voice, but not a nice teasing. The tone was one a bully would use. Taunting. Torturing. Jeffrey thought his action plan. Maybe running through the hall wasn't such a great idea at the moment. He turned and started back toward the office. As soon as Jeff took a step, though, the office door whipped shut with a resounding wham. Jeff recoiled, but he recovered quickly. Rushing forward, Jeff grabbed the doorknob and tried to turn it. The knob wouldn't move. Funnily enough, they actually got The knob wouldn't move. Jeff shook it. The knob didn't give at all. It was locked. And worse, from down the hall toward the lobby, a tinkling, skittering sound was heading in Jeff's direction. A scrape and a clink, a cascade of clinks. Jeff knew exactly what that sound was. He was hearing the coins that had leaked from his duffel bag when he was running. They were strewn through the hallway, and now they were being moved by footsteps. Shuffle, clink, scrape, clatter. Something was moving the coins across the linoleum. Each note of the jaded little ditty drilled into Jeff's body. Like each tone was of a billion nanobots being boring into his pores. Jeff's whole body began to tremble. He could even hear his teeth chattering. Jeff looked away from the office door. He took off down the hall, away from the lobby, toward the red exit sign at the hallway's end. In full gallop, when he reached the emergency exit door, Jeff slammed into the Jeff slammed into the crash bar and bounced back. As he shifted his feet to keep his balance, he heard a rapid rush of footsteps whizzing toward him. Jeff turned. As he shifted his feet to keep his balance, he heard a rapid rush of footsteps whirring toward him. Jeff turned, just in time to see the flash of a pirate's hood arcing through the air, heading directly at his face. Jeff opened his mouth to scream, but the sound was cut off before it could begin. Alright, so chapter 13 will be the final chapter for the night. So that way, because I'm looking at it like doing chapters 14 through 20 for part 4, and then 21 through 25 for the final part of the book, for the final part of the reading stream. And then we'll be watching the Five Nights at Freddy's movie to see if there was any sort of differences, even though the book is supposed to be based on the novel. The novel is supposed to be based on the movie in some way, shape, or form. Chapter 13. No matter how steadily Maxine stroked Bonesy's fur, the dog wouldn't settle. Max had cuddled close to the dog in the pickup cab, but still he hadn't stopped whining and whimpering since Jeff and the others had disappeared into the pizzeria. Bonesy's jowls were frothed with drool, and his whole body was quivering. It was making Maxine nervous, primarily because Bonesy's anxiety was contagious, and Maxine didn't need the dog's apprehension added to her own. She was plenty agitated already. For maybe the 20th or 50th time, Maxine pushed up the cuff of the long-sleeved black shirt she'd worn for the stupid, ill-conceived venture. She frowned at the digital numbers on her black sports watch. Where the hell are they? Maxine asked herself. Enough was enough. Maxine couldn't sit here waiting any longer. She couldn't imagine what was taking them so long. They were supposed to have made a quick mess, grabbed anything valuable, and come back out. That shouldn't have taken this much time. Huffing, Maxine reached for the driver's side door handle. She flung the door open. Before Maxine could move a muscle to leave the pickup, Bonesy leaped across her. In a fraction of a second, the dog was out of the truck and bolting away. Bonesy, wait! Maxine scrambled out of the truck and started after her dog. Bonesy! She shouted again. Bonesy didn't break stride. He crossed the broken asphalt in a flash of fur. Maxine ran, but before she'd made it even 10 feet, Bonesy had disappeared into the trees at the edge of the pizzeria's lot. Maxine stopped. Her heart was a jackhammer in her chest. Her mind immediately filled with images of Bonesy getting lost, or stolen, or hit by a car, or mauled by a wild animal. Maxine hugged herself. Reluctantly, she turned back to the pickup. She couldn't outrun her dog. Her best bet was to go after him in the truck. But she didn't have the keys. Her brother did. Maxine had no choice. She had to go inside the building and get Jeff so they could go after Bonesy. Maxine looked up at the loading dock door. What lay beyond him looked like the yawning opening to a demon's lair. Not smart, Maxine muttered as she took a step forward. Yeah, but she didn't have a better idea, so she kept going. Picking her way across the dirty, disintegrating concrete of the loading dock, Max went slowly, allowing her eyes time to adjust to this insufficient light. Once she had more night vision, she was able to spot a flattened door. That must have been the battering sound she had heard right after Jeff and the others had disappeared from her sight. Maxine crept forward. She reached the open doorway and leaned through it. She peered left and right and saw that she was on the threshold of the pizzeria's stainless steel filled industrial kitchen. Jeff? Wait, Jeff? Maxine called softly. Nothing but silence answered her. Maxine gingerly stepped into the kitchen. She looked around. Carl? She tried. This time Maxine got a response of sorts. The trill of a child's laughter came from behind Maxine. The sound felt like a light touch, a tickle between her shoulder blades. Maxine twirled around. Hold on a second, we gotta do this sound effect. Immediately, she saw the source of the laughter. Standing in a muted golden luminance emanating from a door on the opposite side of the kitchen, a little sandy-haired boy stared at Maxine coolly. No smile, no expression at all. The child's expression was blank. He must be lost, Maxine thought, and traumatized. Maxine opened her mouth to say hello, but the boy turned and dashed away before she could even begin her greeting. He flashed through the open doorway and disappeared into the dapples of gray outside of the kitchen. Hey, wait! Maxine shouted. No longer thinking about her brother or Bonesy, Maxine strode forward following the boy. A lost little kid trampled everything. A lost little kid trumped everything. She had to help him. Exiting the kitchen, Maxine found herself in a long hallway that was as dark and uninviting as an abandoned tunnel in a coal mine. She looked left and right down the black and white checkerboard floored hall. It was empty. Hello? Maxine called out. The word danced down the hall, spun around, and came back. A pervasive hush chased it. Max tried again, more loudly. Hello? Once again the word twirled away from her and came flying back. Once again, utter stillness followed it. Maxine frowned, gazing down the hall again, both ways. Which direction should she go? Maxine shrugged. She turned to her left. Cold! The word came out in two syllables. Old. Cut old. It was a child's voice. From the pitch it sounded like the same little boy who had giggled. The sound came from the right end of the hallway. Maxine reversed her direction. She took a step forward. Warmer, said same little boy's voice. Playful. Maxine made a face. You've got to be kidding me, she muttered. The kid wasn't as traumatized as she thought he was. Maybe he wasn't even lost. Still, she should probably find him in case he was. And she still needed to find Jeff, too. Maxine took a half step forward. Her head swiveled left and right. All of her nerve endings were on alert. For the next few minutes, Maxine pushed deeper into the barrels of the tomb-like building, pausing to listen at closed doors, but lacking the courage to open them. Maxine followed the hallway until it went around a corner. Warmer, the boy said again. His voice sounded both close and far away at the same time. Maxine still couldn't figure out where the kid was. It almost seemed like he was in the walls, moving along with her. But that was impossible. Maxine looked down the stretch of corridor in front of her, and for the first time since she'd left the kitchen, she saw movement. A set of double doors at the far end of the hall was swinging as if someone had just pushed through them. Maxine eyed the wagging doors. Had the boy gone that way? Or was it someone else? Maxine opened her mouth to call her brother's name, but by some instinct closed her mouth again. Wrapping her arms around herself to ward off the chill that made it feel like her skin was inching its way along her bones, Maxine walked slowly toward the doors. Each of her steps ticked a shy cadence on the cracked linoleum. Maxine, fighting the overpowering urge to run in the opposite direction, forced herself forward. She felt oddly disconnected from herself, as if she wasn't so much moving as she was being moved. It felt like she was being compelled through a black hole by some magnetic force. And then she was pushed through the double doors herself. Halfway through them, she paused. Pencil-like lines of golden light, three of them, inched toward Maxine. She looked ahead at them, and she realized she was seeing sunlight coming through dirty, narrow windows. The light was odd, almost sepia-toned. Maxine took another step and let go of the doors. As such a shh, and a tickle of air current told her the doors were falling closed behind her. Hello? Maxine called. Are you in here? When she got no answer, again, Maxine checked her surroundings. As soon as she did, her crawling skin picked up its pace. So did her heart rate. What is this place? Maxine rotated to take in the metal shelving and stainless steel work tables. Her gaze scanned piles of tools and what looked like robotic parts. Metal legs and arms and torsos and eyeless heads were. Maxine's gaze stopped scanning and locked in. It had gotten stuck on something Maxine hadn't noticed at first. Beyond the work tables, a reclining metal chair with straps sat empty. Above the chair, and spaced throughout the room, metal pendant lights below hung low, dripping only the barest hint of illumination. That's not good, Maxine thought. Maxine so wanted to run. Why wasn't she running? Against her own will, Maxine took another 2 steps into the room. She intended to look around to see if she could spot the little boy, but her gaze remained riveted on the chair. Even when Maxine felt a shiver of warning skittering down her spine, the sensation of being watched, strong and urgent, she kept her gaze fixed on the chair. For all she knew, a monster was behind her, but she couldn't seem to turn to find out. Psst! It was the little boy again, close and loud. Maxine yelped and finally spun around. She scrutinized the area behind her, but she couldn't see the kid. Where was he? Maxine was getting really, really tired of this game. It was beyond creepy in here. The robot parts Maxine had first seen in the room were bad enough, but now her gaze had landed on a more complete robot, an animatronic, a big one. Maxine had to tilt her head back to inspect the full height of it. The jitters that were still prodding Maxine to run kicked up a notch, but Maxine stayed where she was. She studied the massive thing guardedly. What Maxine was looking at appeared to be a decommissioned version of one of the animal characters that had been part of the pizzeria's heyday. In fact, Maxine thought, as she looked at the morally broken down bear more closely, this might have been Freddy himself. Although the stiff, ragged-looking robotic bear had all its parts intact, unlike whatever critters had lost their pieces lying around the room, it had seen better days. Its brown fur matted, grungy, and smelling disgustingly of decay, had large chunks missing, as if something had eaten its way through the plush covering from the inside. The missing pieces of fur revealed ropey twines of wires and sharp links of aging metal. The bare face was the most intact part of the robot's structure. Its impossibly wide mouth was stuffed full of what looked like very sharp white teeth, and its round white eyes were in pristine condition. "In here!" It was the little boy again. His voice was muffled, and it was coming from... Maxine gave herself a mental shake. That can't be right, she thought. But replaying the boy's words in her head, Maxine realized she had heard what she thought she'd heard. The boy's voice was coming from inside the ratty bear. "How in the heck did you get in there?" Maxine asked. Her question was hushed, disbelieving. Steeling herself, Maxine took a step forward. She kept an eye unwaveringly on the bear as she stepped forward yet again. Hesitating an instant, she finally leaned in and put her ear against the grinning bear's chest. Maxine immediately heard a childish giggle. She jumped back and gawked at the bear's belly. The kid was inside the bear. How did it... It didn't matter. Maxine had to get the kid out of the thing. Giggling or not, that boy was little, and Maxine couldn't just leave him inside a mountain of gross fur and metal. But how was she going to get the boy out? Maxine walked around the bear. Gingerly, she poked and pushed at various parts of its anatomy. There must be a switch or something, she thought. Nothing that Maxine messed with on the bear did anything, except the jaw. When Maxine reached up and put her hand against the side of the bear's head, the jaw moved. Encouraged, Maxine shifted her hand and levered the jaw downward. The bear's mouth yawned again, yawned apart, revealing an opening that got bigger and bigger and bigger. Maxine goggled at the huge gaping hole that now made up the lower half of the bear's face. She frowned at the aperture. Was it big enough for a child to get through? Probably. But from where Maxine stood, well below the bear's open mouth, she couldn't see down inside the bear. Maxine looked around the room. She needed something to stand on. Maxine spotted a folding chair tucked against the end of one of the long shelves. She trotted over and grabbed it. Bringing the dirty gray metal chair back to the animatronic, Maxine positioned it in front of the bear's legs. She stepped up onto the chair's seat. The chair let out a snapping ping and it wobbled, but it held. Maxine shifted her feet and leaned toward the gaping mouth. It was amazing how a human being could powerfully want to do one thing and yet do the exact opposite. Every fiber of Maxine's being was yelling, "No!" as she put her face toward the bear's parted teeth. As soon as Maxine got close enough to the mouth, she tilted her head to look down inside the cavern of the bear's torso. She gasped when a small hand rose up, reaching toward her face. "Dare you," Maxine began. But then her words and her face were snatched downward. The little hand had seized her by the mouth, small fingers curled around her lower teeth and lip. It yanked, and Maxine, squealing, was heaved downward through a metal-filled tunnel wrapped in wires. Maxine was on the skinny side, but she wasn't skinny enough to fit comfortably through the confines of an animatronic tra- tra- trachea, metal scoring at her skin. Maxine screamed as her feet came off the chair. Vaguely aware of the sound of the chair clattering to the floor, Maxine scissored her feet and pressed her hand against the bear's crusty shoulders. She pushed against the hard surface and kicked frantically. Maxine felt her foot graze against something, and she heard a ting. She'd hit one of the pendant lights. Trying to twist one way and then the other get free, Maxine saw the pendant's light rays carrying frenziedly back and forth. Still being lowered inexorably into a seemingly bottomless, lightless well, Maxine kept fighting, even as her skin was ravaged by serrated metal. She craned her neck, looking up toward freedom. On the ceiling she caught a glimpse of a shadow play. Her churning legs and flapping arms created a tangle of light and dark entanglements that looked like the battle between a knight and a tail-whipping dragon. Watching her struggle this way almost made it seem impersonal, like Maxine was outside of it, not caught within it. Another powerful tug came from inside the bear, and Maxine had to admit that this was happening to her, and it was very personal. Maxine slipped even farther into the darkness, and then a shocking, searing, jagged pressure sliced through Maxine's waist, and she screamed. Through her screams, she heard a wet thud. Maxine's brain had only seconds left, but in those seconds, Maxine knew she'd just heard the sound of her lower body hitting the floor. The bear had bitten her in half. So I decided to get a drink real quick. Mike sat at his kitchen table. He wasn't doing much of anything, just sitting there. Well, actually, he was doing something. He held the plastic and tin fake security badge, and he was turning it over and over in his hand, staring at it as if it were a crystal ball that could give him answers to his endless questions. Most of Mike's questions were related to the old happenings in his dreams. Those questions were so complex that he knew he had no hope of answering them. Another set of questions were related to Vanessa. What an odd woman, but odd in a good way. Mike was powerfully drawn to her, and at the same time she made him profoundly nervous. No way his brain could think him out of that tangle either. Of course, there were the usual questions about how Mike was going to clean up the train wreck that was his life, but those questions were old and boring, and they too had no answers. So Mike settled on the most immediate puzzle. How could he make up with Abby? His sister was seriously angry with him for locking her in her room the night before. As a result, she was even more distant than usual. Mike wished he could explain to Abby that everything he did was part of his attempt to take care of her. His overriding goal was to protect her, keep her safe. But Abby didn't want to hear anything Mike had to say. A few feet from Mike, high-pitched chatter and canned laughter came from the TV. Abby sat on the sofa, but she didn't seem to be paying attention to the cartoon on the screen. She was, as usual, bent over her drawing pad. She scribbled constantly, a furrow between her brows, her tongue clamped between her teeth and protruding from her lips. Mike sighed and stood. He walked over to the couch and sat down next to Abby. "What are you working on?" Mike asked. Abby stopped drawing. She got up and flounced into the kitchen, sitting down in the very chair that Mike had just vacated. Mike sighed. "So what's the plan here?" Mike asked Abby's back. She was wearing a banana and yellow overalls today. The crisscross of the overalls' back straps seemed to glare at Mike. "You're never going to talk to me? You're never going to speak to me again?" he pushed. Abby said nothing. She centered her drawing pad in front of her on the table. She arranged a dozen or so drawing pins next to it. Then she bent over her drawing again. "Seems like it," Mike thought. Mike fingered the badge once more. He held it up out in front of him. "I guess you don't want this then," he said. Abby looked up. Abby looked up. Mike smiled. "Gotcha," he thought. Mike tossed the badge to Abby. She lifted a hand and caught it. "Pretty cool, right?" Mike asked. Abby held the badge and glanced at it with apparent disinterest. Mike knew her well enough, however, to recognize fake nonchalance when he saw it. Maybe he'd cracked her armor. But no. Abby threw the badge back at Mike. He hardly snatched it from the air before it hit him in the nose. Abby picked up a pencil and returned to drawing. Mike looked up at the ceiling and exhaled loudly. "Forget it," he said. Mike stood. Striding back into the kitchen, he grabbed the knob of the junk drawer near the sink. He went to pull it open. It jammed. He jiggled it, biting back a curse. Finally, he got the drawer open and he dropped the toy badge in with the other junk. He rammed the drawer back into place. Turning toward his sister, Mike said to the back of her head, "I'm trying my best, Abby. I really am." Abby remained silent. Abby remained mute. "Okay, so it's like that," Mike thought. Mike headed toward the hallway. At first, Abby didn't move, but then, out of the corner of Mike's eye, he saw her lift her head. Just a little. Mike pretended he didn't see Abby's gaze flit his way. He also pretended that he didn't see her expression, which looked every bit as remorseful as he felt himself. "Maybe she'll come around soon," Mike told himself as he headed to his bedroom. There was nothing he could do if she didn't, and certainly there was nothing more he could do right now. On to other mysteries. Mike entered his bedroom, leaving the door open so he could listen for Abby, in case she decided to call to him, or get in some kind of trouble. Mike opened his closet and plucked his laptop from the single shelf above his pitiful, sparse collection of clothes. Heck, make that a sparse collection of his belongings, period. Mike had no furniture in his room, other than a bed and a nightstand, not just because he couldn't afford anything more. He also had no need for other pieces of furniture. He had nothing to put on or in dressers or bureaus or desks. Besides his clothes and shoes, his laptop, and a few tools, all his closet held was a box of old photographs and a plastic container of wooden blocks. The blocks had been Mike's favorite toy when he was a kid. He'd always loved building things. In spite of everything, he couldn't bring himself to throw the blocks out. Taking his laptop to his bed and feeling supremely sorry for himself, Mike fluffed his pillow and settled himself back against the headboard. He opened his laptop. After logging in, he clicked on his browser icon, and he started typing in a search box. Mike began with Freddy Fazbear. He hit enter and looked at the screen. Mike's search brought him not much more than a bunch of stock images of Freddy and his weirdo cohorts. Mike got up close looks at the bunny, the chick, and the fox, as well as a few other critters he didn't know about, but he didn't find anything interesting. He backed out of the search. Then he tried again, typing Freddy Fazbear Missing Children. Now we're talking, Mike said as a slew of news headlines popped up on his screen. Mike scanned them and he picked Sad Night at Freddy's. Clicking on the header, Mike skimmed the article. Unfortunately, it didn't tell him much more than Vanessa had. But wait, there was an embedded video. Mike clicked on the video and hit the play button. Watching the white circle spinning in the middle of his screen, Mike tapped his fingers on the side of his laptop as he waited for the video to load. Finally, the image of a blonde, pert-nosed female reporter filled Mike's screen. The woman's drop-shouldered top and leggings, as well as the curly wildness of her big hair, screamed 80s. Mid-80s, Mike thought. The woman had a painted-on face typical for the time. She had large eyes and a wide mouth, and at the moment both eyes and mouth were arranged in a theatrical expression of tragic regret. The woman was precisely the position in front of a bright, shiny version of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. It was the Freddy's Mike was guarding, but it was a blast from the past variant of the place. The paint was fresh, the lighting was bright, and there were people milling around it. Lots of people. And police cars. Several uniformed officers were corralling onlookers. Men in suits, obviously detectives, were strutting about importantly. The puffy-haired woman wasn't the only reporter on the scene either. A bunch of news vans were parked just beyond a ribbon of yellow crime scene tape, which fluttered in a steady breeze. A few other men and women with microphones posed in front of cameramen who had heavy 80s-era video cameras weighing down their shoulders. The blonde reporter began speaking. Tragedy struck tonight, she began predictably, at a local pizzeria. Freddy's Pizzeria has become renowned for family fun, a great place for kids. But tonight it was anything but that. Instead, it was the heartbreaking setting of abduction and terror. 5 children who were attending a birthday event at the pizzeria suddenly and mysteriously vanished into thin air. Mike was immediately caught up in the scene. He leaned closer to his screen. And that is going to be it for this part of Five Nights at Freddy's. On the next part, I will do my best to read chapters 14 through 20. And then after that, read through 21 through 25. Well, the epilogue, you know what I mean. But still, yeah, that's going to be the plan. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and end it there tonight. I'm going to end it there for the night. Tomorrow night, if I am not home too late, I will probably play something. I'm not entirely sure what, if anything, I might play. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for me here tonight. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this reading stream. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is Forrest Walpole, signing off.